thing I want to talk about. So Trump successfully negotiated a tariff victory that was very, very heavily one-sided in America's favor. This was with the EU specifically. So first of all, like one of the examples of how lopsided this is, just goes to show, how much pull again that the United States has, being the top dog. It's like the Super Bowl every year. You don't become champion and you're champion forever. In order to stay the world's empire, the world's greatest empire, the world's biggest, at least as far as we know historically, America is, depending on your criteria, the most powerful nation to ever exist. I happen to believe that. I would say second is probably the British Empire. And then, I don't know, there's been a lot of empires, but it's definitely those are the top two of all time. The EU is going to have to buy $750 billion in American energy and accept a 15% tariffs on all goods. That sounds like a win to me. But regardless of the terms, people can argue. Again, I'm not an economist. I don't fully understand tariffs. I'm not the tariff expert, if that's even a thing. But the European Union is built in such a weird way that Ursula von der Leyen, or whoever the lady was that was negotiating, who represented the European Union, why does she get to decide and negotiate on behalf of all nations in the EU? I know there's meetings in Parliament and people vote, blah, 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 but it's not that pure. There's a lot of corruption involved. Now, I'm not saying there's not corruption in certain systems. Every single system when it comes to power, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So there's going to be corruption in any government system. But the European Union specifically, they're not doing a good job keeping the faith of their constituents, because certain countries, independent, quote unquote, and quote unquote sovereign nations, if you fall under the European Union, you have to adhere by their laws, and sometimes their laws seriously clash heads with the independent, sovereign, biggest, air quotes of all time, nations' own laws that their own people voted on in their own independent country elections. For example, Giorgia Meloni, Prime Minister of Italy. She ran a very serious populist campaign. One of the main focuses of her campaign was talking about, and it addressed the growing concern about unfiltered, unregulated immigration. How did the media respond? The way that they do anytime someone brings up this and just wants to have a conversation. They attacked her, said this is Nazi rhetoric, this is just like America. Trump is Orange Hitler, he's the second coming of Hitler, and all the things that you guys have heard about this, about immigration, right? Whether or not she actually intended to get into office and implement these, or if she just did it as a way to capitalize on a popular growing attitude and perspective of Italians, she got into office and she hasn't done exactly what she promised. Obviously, again, politics are complicated. Government systems are complicated. Checks and balances are complicated, whether they exist or not, and the levels that they do. She hasn't been able to fulfill her promise as big as it was regarding immigration specifically. So a lot of people have, not looking at it, limited experience. I'm one. I'm not an Italian citizen. I don't have Italian citizenship. I'm an American, always have been, always will be. Didn't grow up in Italy. So I don't understand their system as good as the people who do. So a lot of people look at Italy and they just assume a bunch of things and they go, wow, she lied. She lied. Populism, it's a complete sham. You should never vote for populism. See, these people, they're all liars. They get in and they can't fulfill their promises. Her specifically. Here's the facts. Italy does not print the euro. The euro is the currency that a lot of the countries in the European Union use. Italy is one of them. Italy doesn't get to print its own currency. Brussels does. Brussels being the capital of Belgium, which is where a lot of the EU and NATO's stuff is done out of. Okay? So, I know this for a fact. You can look this up yourself. Giorgia Meloni started to deport illegals. started to beef up border security, started to improve the system of immigration because they've acknowledged, they know, the people voted on, they worked on it, discussed it. Not all immigration is bad. So let's focus on the illegals. So they had their own thing. Similar, but obviously a little different in some ways to America's, the second Trump administration's approach to border security and addressing the immigration problem. And she and Italy were threatened with having their currency printing halted, which would collapse the Italian economy. So she had no choice but to either scale back or just completely stop. This is fact. This is not the only country that this happened in. With the European Union, it's a big, big, big problem because, again, yes, you are an independent sovereign nation, quote unquote, but EU law supersedes the rest. EU law supersedes the rest of the constituents, the rest of the countries that make up the European Union, similar to the United States. The way we intended it, we passed an amendment specifying that state rights should override and be more important than federal law because there are 50 states and a few territories. Each individual state has different issues, and the federal, it's ridiculous and unrealistic to ask a country of over 340 million people, the federal government, to be able to understand what's best for every single person. So that's why the individual is so important. And it's explicitly stated multiple times in the United States Constitution. The rights we're given, the rights we're born with. What is the smallest minority? The individual. The individual needs to be protected. Point blank, period. We'll figure out the rest as we go in complicated situations, like when it's 100 people versus one. Does that one person not matter because it's just one person? Or do each individual making up that 100-person group not matter because it's just a big group, right? This is where things get complicated, but you find solutions by talking it out and just doing something about it. So I just think it's crazy. I wonder how people feel. I've talked to, I have German neighbors, I have German coworkers, and I've picked their brain on this stuff. It's really interesting. It's really interesting to hear their different perspectives. Me being someone that is, again, an American who grew up in America, always have been, always will be an American. I like to understand from their perspective. I have some German coworkers that are not fully German. I have a couple that are half Croatian, half German. I have one who says that he's German, but his last name is Polish. So there's something going on there. And they all have interesting backgrounds, interesting life experiences, and I value their opinions. So, big W if you're an American, big L if you're a European Union person. And you know what's funny? A lot of countries who have joined the EU, because they joined when it was beneficial to them, because they were, a developing country, or, a lot of Eastern European countries joined maybe because, the Soviet Union only collapsed it collapsed in the 80s. And the consequences of that are still being felt and heard today. There are independent countries that were part of the Soviet Union. There's a trend. There's a correlation, a little bit of causation between whether or not you're in Europe and the stability of your economy, and if you were a former Soviet Union power or constituent. For example, Poland. Polish people are very proud people. They're very unique, distinct people, distinct country, distinct culture, distinct history, distinct language. But during the Soviet Union, they were a part of the Soviet Union. They feel very strongly about the Soviet Union, very strongly about Russians. So you have to keep that in mind. They're also one of the largest recipients of aid from the European Union. If you look at the 5 largest recipients and the 5 largest contributors, there's a correlation there. I want to say off the top of my head, can't remember. You can look it up. Actually, I will look it up. Nah, screw that. I don't want to get carried away. But if you look at it, there's definitely a causation and correlation between the 5 recipients of aid most likely being at one point not as sovereign in recent history. So there's, the consequences to that. Anyway, interesting stuff. W if you're an American, L if you're an European Union guy or gal. But a lot of countries have flirted with leaving the EU. It started with Brexit with the UK. A lot of people felt very strongly about it. A lot of people who don't know anything, don't research things, don't give a shite. The closed-minded, not empathetic, not from the EU, not from the UK. They had their kind of silly opinions. Opinions are like buttholes, right? Everyone has them. They all stink. But the UK showed that you can leave. You can leave the EU. You don't have to be in it. It shouldn't be demolished because, again, it was established for a reason. And maybe that original vision has been corrupted and destroyed, but it still needs to be there because there are countries that rely on aid, right? I'm not saying it should be destroyed, but it is pretty insane the lack of sovereignty you get as an independent country, quote unquote, if you join or are part of the EU. So the UK learned this. They had a vote on it. Their people felt that the EU was no longer in their best interest, so they left. And there have been consequences, intended or unintended, right? A few other countries since Brexit have flirted with that idea. Germany has flirted with the idea. Italy has flirted with that idea. And from what I can remember, so I know for a fact, 100% confident that Germany is in the top 5 contributors to the European Union. Italy, I think, is in the top 5, definitely is in the top 10. Those two have been the loudest voices, really, in wanting to leave the EU. And you think about, when you look at, there's, again, just look into it. I've looked into this, and I'm not the first person to say this. A lot of European Union folks have said it, have told me this. But if you just look at laws, so just look at, let me give a good example. There's been a few national elections in Germany since I moved here in 2019. The first one, so if you're not familiar with what do you call this style of politics, it's not like in America there's a two-party system. There are multiple parties, and parties can join together, join forces in order to beat a common enemy, quote unquote, not in a violent way. But in Germany, really, the globalist liberal parties have kind of joined together to defeat the conservatives. So there hasn't been a conservative in the traditional sense party in power in Germany, at least since I got here. So it's been a coalition. Coalition is what I'm thinking of. Coalitionary politics. So coalitionary governments. So when I first got here, there were whisperings of this populist group, but the media labeled them as Nazis. They're called the AfD, right? That stands for Alternative for Deutschland, or Alternative for Germany. If you don't get to look at them, if they get censored, all you hear about them when you look it up is the things that the media wants you to think about them, right? That they are neo-Nazis, that they hate brown people. They want to start rounding up people that are not German, that are not white Germans, right? That they're not ethnically German. So they start to invoke Nazi rhetoric. They do, not the AfD. Germany has tried to ban the AfD. They've tried to dissolve it and pass a law that makes the AfD and probably parties similar to the AfD, depending on their criteria, make it illegal. They want to ban a political party. We've seen this before. We've seen this before numerous times. But recently, as in less than 100 years ago, we saw it in this very same country of Germany. I'm not saying that if you vote on, say there was a vote and you're a German and you decide to vote against the AfD, I'm not saying that you're an evil person. I'm not saying that you're a fascist. Everyone votes for different reasons. Everyone votes for themselves, for their families. Some people vote because they think they'll get affirmation from other people. That's why you see people constantly airing their political opinions, because during the age of information, people feel this is part of a generational thing. I've noticed this mostly more. It's very common with millennials, so Gen Y, Gen Z, and Gen A, Generation Alpha. You'll see it with boomers, you'll see it with older people too, you'll see it with Gen Xers. But Generation Y, Z, and A, there's this thing because information overload is a real psychological term. It's a real thing that's being studied actively as I speak. During the age of information, there's information overload. And a lot of people feel the need to speak on things that they don't understand for whatever reason. I'm not saying it's always malevolent. It's nice to sound smart, right? It's nice to kind of give your opinion and share and talk about it. And when someone says, "Oh, that's pretty cool. Oh, you're pretty smart. You know what you're talking about." Going back to the AFD thing, if you looking at everybody individually, again, individual German, they work at a bakery, okay? They have a family to feed, they have a family to provide for, they have bills to pay. They don't have time to look into this. They're too busy. They don't get into politics, but they still vote because they feel it's their duty to. They look up the AFD. All that they see in the top 10 pages on Google is neo-Nazi, 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 racist, xenophobia, Hitler, all that stuff, all the bad terms. Well, putting yourself in their shoes, I don't have time to look into this. They sound pretty bad. I'm going to vote yes on banning this party. They didn't actually successfully ban the AFD. But the whispering started back in 2019 when I first got here and the first local and federal election started. The AFD didn't win. The coalition ended up beating them. Boom. Next election rolls around. AFD still loses. Coalition wins. But the AFD is starting to get more popular. Interesting. So the attacks start to increase by the media. Not just the German media, European Union media, world media. You can find news articles by American press, people who write stories that have never been to Germany, never talked to a German, never talked to an AFD member, never talked to an SPD member, never talked to any member who voted for. They don't know what they're talking about. They're just repeating something without any basis of fact. Which is, as far as I know, against the journalistic integrity and code of ethics. But anyway, what do I know? I'm just an idiot podcaster who's been doing it for 6 years. Point I'm trying to make is, each election that goes by, in Germany specifically, my home right now, my residence, the AFD is getting more popular. And it's terrifying the powers that be, for whatever reason. There's been a populist movement surging across Europe, surging across the European Union, not just in Germany, in Italy. Giorgia Meloni is a populist. She ran on a populist message. Whether she intends to actually be a populist in execution, we'll find out. But the people who voted for her, they voted for her because they connected and identified with her populist message. In Germany, the AFD, the populist. Here's how I equate, and look into it if you're interested. This is how I equate the AFD. It is the populist movement for Germany, so it is the MAGA equivalent. It's literally MAGA, it's MAGA, make Germany great again. That's the AFD equivalent. And I know this because I went to their website and I read everything. I read their entire platform on issues that I cared most about. Obviously, what they say on the service and what they actually plan on doing is different. That's where individuals get to vote in a democracy. They get the choice, their own individual voice, right? But I also listen to speeches, or I read translated versions of speeches. And the things that they say, you can only fake being a populist if you're actually a fascist, or you actually plan to start killing and deporting and, being the second coming of Hitler, right? So do your own research, form your own opinion, but the AFD is not the second coming of Hitler. Just read their platform, listen to the speeches, read the translated transcripts of the things that their leaders of the party say. And the same thing goes across Europe. There was a populist leader in Slovenia or Slovakia. Kind of sad that I forgot, but I want to say a year and a half to 2 years ago. Yeah, he was really instrumental. He had a certain opinion that went against the European Union and NATO's perspective on ending the Russia-Ukraine war, and then all of a sudden someone tried to assassinate him. He barely survived, but he's alive, and I think he's still in power. You go to Poland. Poland has long since been opposed to this unchecked, unregulated immigration. They feel a certain way about the Russia-Ukraine war because, like I said, the history. Look at the history of Poland and how it's been treated by Russia in numerous wars. Stay hydrated, stay caffeinated. Another example, Hungary. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, he's conservative. He's a populist. He gets crap by the media. He gets flack from the media probably more than any single leader in the European Union, for sure. And he also feels a certain way about the Russia-Ukraine war. He feels a certain way about the unchecked, unregulated immigration problem that's sweeping across the entire world. It's not just America. It's not just the Americas, North and South and Central. It's not just Europe. It's everywhere in the entire world. It's now leaked over into Japan. Part of the appeal for Japan is that they're so traditional. And I'm saying this as an outsider who loves Japan. I've been studying Japanese. I want to go there really bad. I've talked to people who have gone there and even lived there, and they love Japan. Part of the universal appeal of Japan is that it's traditional, it's conservative. And those terms have been bastardized by the media and by this really bad, really poor education system that we have across the world, but conservative as in conserving tradition. You go to Japan, you want to see Kyoto. You go to Kyoto and you see the classic old wooden style, old style Japanese houses, the old style Japanese architecture. They're really respectful. Their culture is really interesting. They can be respectful. They bow. And there's a give and a take. There's pros and cons of all these systems. But Japan, for the longest, has been, I want to say, the last figures I saw was 98% ethnically Japanese, 2% not non-Japanese for the residents there. There's a reason for that. One, the culture can be really hard to adapt. It can be a culture shock. There's some strict language requirements if you go to live there, depending on how you get there legally. But Japan, they're starting to echo the rhetoric that the United States and the rest of the world was starting to echo, leading up to the start and the rise and the peak of the immigration problem. So it's like the bastion of conserving traditions. Japan, they're starting to echo the same sentiment. And people are noticing. People are smarter and more resourceful than the powers that be give them any credit for. So I'm going to move on. That's a long-winded way of saying, man, these tariffs, it's a big W for America. It's an L for the European Union. And I hope that European Union countries truly, because being as sovereign as possible, it's just something that, I take for granted for sure. I was born in America. I was born at the greatest time that I could possibly have been born in. I look at the same as if I was born 50 years ago or 50 years in the future. Would have been perfect time to live. Not that it was easier or harder or more convenient or less convenient. It's just that I got to live and experience this point in time, this point in life, this point in human history that is unique and is never going to happen again. It's similar to the experiences that my dad had growing up, and his dad. But you ever notice that every generation swears that their childhood was the greatest and the future generations don't know what they got? The reason why is because there is no singular generation that had it better than everyone else. Every single generation with the right perspective